The College Football Playoff Committee just made their first significant move of the season. Kind of a shocker for some maybe not. They moved Washington in front of Florida State. Did the committee get it right? We're going to talk about that and the rest of the rankings coming up next. All right, the rankings are out. You can see them on the screen here, 1 through 25. Not a lot of change, but the change that is there is significant, specifically at 4 and 5, where you have Washington moving in front of Florida State. Now, if you go down the ladder a little bit, you're going to notice that Oregon State dropped to 16. Notre Dame is at 18 there. That comes into play a little bit for the way that I'm thinking about things. LSU is another key kind of player in this that has played a lot of these top teams. We'll look at Penn State too, them in there. So all these 2 and 3 loss teams and how the committee is viewing those could be important. Here's what I think. I think the committee got it right as far as putting Washington in front of Florida State. I think that was long overdue. Here's what I think they got wrong. I think they completely whiffed on Michigan. Now, Michigan has not looked good the last 2 weeks, and I can't help but think they're going to look any better this week when they play the Buckeyes. Now, this is probably not going to matter. If they beat the Buckeyes, good on them. I think that if you're saying eye test right now, Michigan is at best 5. The reason is Michigan's best win is at Penn State. Okay, and that's a good win, right? There's nothing wrong with that, except for Penn State's offense is abysmal. So when you have a good defense and you're playing against an offense that's not very good, that makes the game a little bit easier for you. And in their case, they just ran the football all second half. Now you'll say, hey, they did what they needed to do, right? On the road in a nasty environment. Fine and dandy. You can think that all that you want. However, we got to look at the eye test. We got to look at the resume. We've got to look at other factors when it comes to ranking these teams. And Michigan is the outlier to me. Florida State's got a win against LSU. They held Jaden Daniels to 24 points. Ohio State, that win against Notre Dame. And it doesn't matter to me if you say, hey, they had, 10 guys on the field. On the last play, they should have had 11. Notre Dame should. Well, guess what? That's part of evaluating the team, right? Coaching is part of evaluating the team. And so the fact that Notre Dame decided to have 10 guys on the field on the last play, good on Ohio State for running the football. So they won that game. The reason I'm giving that so much credit is because Notre Dame is the best team if you looked at yards per play on offense and defense as far as rank goes. They're 5 and 10, right? They're ranked 10th on offense and 5th in defense. That's an average rank of about 7.5. So that's the best, most balanced team in the country as far as those metrics go. All right, now considering that they have the rank of the most balanced team, I consider that a very high quality road win, much higher than I do Penn State, even though Penn State as a 2-loss team sits at 11. Penn State just does not look good on offense. They fired their offensive coordinator, and to me, they're a good football team, but don't go overvaluing them. A lot of people overvalued Colorado and USC at the beginning of the season. I said that was a dangerous thing to do. I think that Penn State is exactly that. It's a dangerous thing to go overvalue Penn State. In general, the Big Ten offenses are not that great. Now, that's hard to say, that they're not great, but that's what it looks like to me, considering that there's really good defenses in the Big Ten as a way you could, like I say, well, they're just really good defenses, right? But I think the offenses aren't very good. Similarly, you could look at the Pac-12 and you could say the offenses are good, the defenses aren't very good. Well, I think there's an argument to be made both ways. What my eyes tell me, though, is that Penn State's not elite, right? They're a good team. I think Utah would beat Penn State. I'm looking at this list. I think Oklahoma would beat Penn State. I think Oregon State would beat Penn State. I think LSU, Arizona. I think Notre Dame would beat Penn State. Like, I go down the list here, and that's how I am valuing Penn State. Like, who have they beat? Putting too much stock in that, I think, is an issue. Michigan got propped up for that. I don't think they should be. I think they should be behind Florida State. And I think the Seminoles have, again, I said this earlier, they've beaten LSU. They've beaten everybody on their schedule, right? You can't control who they play, how they play. That game against Miami, that rivalry game that they just won, that was a big deal. Now, losing Jordan Travis, okay. Like, we have to really consider that. But you can't consider that until you see them play. And we're going to find out a lot about that injury this week when they go down to the Swamp and they play the Gators. So we'll know everything we need to know about this post-Jordan Travis Florida State team. and what they're made of. Now, Washington, to me, should be probably number 2 if we were just looking at resume. I think eye test, you could put Ohio State at number 2 with eye test and resume mix. That's why I don't have a problem with them being there. Washington has a legitimate case to be number 2. Heck, honestly, they have a legitimate case by resume to be number 1, if we're being really honest here. But the eye test is holding them back. And so this makes me question the way that the committee is valuing the Pac-12 versus the other conferences. I'm not sure by some of these ranks on these teams, it's hard to tell the way that the committee's valuing conferences, because that does matter. Let's talk about Georgia real quick. I heard on ESPN today they were talking about separation, right? Their separation with Georgia and everybody else. I have to tell you, I think the SEC is not as dominant as it was. And I know a lot of you SEC fans are, oh, how could you say that? Like, we prove it on the field every year. Yes. The past is the past. I get that. For years, the past 20 years, you've been the dominant conference. Totally understandable. Not arguing that. This year, and I think this is part of when NIL and the transfer portal came about, I said that this was going to be an equalizer, I thought, amongst the top tier teams. If you're anybody that's watched football or kept up with college football over the years, you know that in the South, they've been paying players for years. And that's not a lie. That might make some people mad, but they have been paying players for years. And then when NIL came out, everybody could pay players. All of a sudden, it was like, okay, we could do that. So it leveled the playing field. So now you could get these kids, and the Southeast has tons of talent along the lines of scrimmage. Everybody knows that. Best linemen normally come from the South. I'm not saying they always do, but a lot of times they come from the southeastern part of the United States. And now those kids, they could go to other places, and they can get paid, just like they used to be able to get paid only to go to the SEC. But now they can go live somewhere that's away from home, and they can go get a paycheck, and they can go see another part of the country, and they could do what they love, playing football for 4 years. And so the transfer portal now makes that a reality for every kid out there. And this is why I think the SEC is losing its grip and is going to lose its grip this year. I know Georgia's really good. Now, Georgia still got to be the favorite probably to win the national championship, but there is more parity at the top than there has been in recent years. Georgia won by 60 points last year, 50-some points last year in the championship game. Blew them out. Ohio State had them on the ropes. Missouri had them on the ropes last year. Those were the only 2 games that were in peril. And Georgia's talent gap was ginormous last year. Anybody that watched those games could tell. But now, with the slew of transfers out, you've got other rosters that built up pretty quickly. Oregon's one that comes to mind. That roster looks pretty complete. Lots of big physical dudes. Heisman-worthy quarterback. A lot of receivers that are tall and fast. Defense that can hit, defensive linemen that can play, an offensive line that can move, a secondary that can intercept passes, come downhill, hit people. Like, that's a very good roster. And that's not happening without NIL and the transfer portal. And so Georgia's roster talent gap, I think, has shrunk. But I think if I look down these teams, you have Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan, good rosters. I would say Oregon's right there. Texas, Alabama too, yes, of course. And then you got like a Washington kind of right behind them. Florida State's there, I said. Washington, that roster's probably not quite as good, but they're a very good football team, and they're very well coached. I think that the gap is closing with Georgia, and I think with the SEC in general. I've got no problem with Georgia being at the top. That's fine. We're going to leave them there. And then we have Ohio State 2, Michigan 3, which I think is really out of place. Washington 4, Florida State 5, Oregon 6, Texas 7, Alabama 8, Missouri's 9, they're eliminated, and Louisville 10. Again, everybody in the top 10 except for Missouri has a chance at making the playoffs. What do I think about the one-loss teams? Oregon, Texas, Alabama, Louisville. Louisville's going to have a chance because they've got undefeated Florida State. That is going to be interesting to see how that goes. All eyes are going to be on Florida State, Florida this weekend, and then in the ACC championship game, Louisville is going to have a chance to prove themselves and show the world that they are worthy. Oregon, Texas, Alabama. There's a lot to be said about these. I heard Greg McElroy there at ESPN talking about why the Tide and Oregon, and he's made these references before that Oregon's resume is not very good, which it's not as far as comparing it to everybody else's resume. Oregon's played USC, their best win's Utah. That Utah win, here's what I'll say about the Utah win. is Utah if you remove the Oregon game, they're the number 1 ranked defense when playing at home. Right now, they're the number 8 ranked defense when playing at home. Oregon went in there and put a whooping on those boys, like one that hasn't happened in however many years that was. Like I don't remember, 30 games or more. They beat them and commanded that game. Over physical, they just outplayed them from start to finish. That matters. And the reason that matters is because of the eye test. Now, Utah's gone on to lose some games there, but if you're valuing the Pac-12 as a really strong conference, which I do, if you just go and look at Washington State and look at Colorado, look at what they did out of conference. Colorado beat TCU, and Colorado beat Nebraska out of conference. And look how they're doing. And then look at Washington State. They beat Wisconsin out of conference, right? And look at where Washington State and Colorado are in the Pac-12. That tells you all you need to know about how strong that conference is. Now, there is one argument point, and that is the Arizona loss. And SEC fans will be on that one. And yeah, okay, so they lost to Mississippi State. It is what it is. Like, they lost the game. What are you going to do? And you say, well, Auburn beat Cal. Well, Cal's not very good. But that one hurts a little bit. I would say hurts the credibility of the conference a little bit. But other than that, if that's the lone blemish, the Pac-12 has been dominant. And I think it's the best conference out there. Here's the other thing I'm going to say about Washington. Washington has, and nobody has, like, we're not talking about this. Washington has by far the best win. Washington has a win against the best one-loss team in the country. Why does that matter? Well, look at it. Just go through the rankings yourself. You're going to see that there's Texas was beat by Oklahoma. Alabama was beat by Texas, right? So Texas would have technically the second best win. And then, let's see, Georgia beat Missouri. So there you go. So Georgia, you say the third best win, and so on and so forth. So, and then Penn State is there at 11, which Ohio State and Michigan have beat. So if you're going off of best win, Washington has the best win. Washington likely has played, could be the toughest schedule of all the top teams. So why not them at 1, right? So back to Oregon, I'd say the Ducks out in front of them, they control their own destiny. So all of this is irrelevant if they lose this weekend against Oregon State, or if they lose in the Pac-12 championship against Washington. It's all irrelevant anyway. So everything that they have is out in front of them. I think they're the best one-loss team. I don't think that there's any way that Texas or Alabama is going to jump them if they went out. Now, Alabama and Texas, that's a different story. Texas showing that they are vulnerable and have shown that a little bit this season since beating Alabama earlier in the season. That was a long time ago. Now, I said earlier, I didn't see any way that Alabama, if they went out, wouldn't jump Texas. Not sure, that's 100% still. Like, I'm kind of wavering a little bit on that, and that's just because Texas is starting to look good. I made that statement thinking, Texas wasn't looking very good, but if Texas can have a strong showing these last couple weeks, I would say they will stay in front of the Tide. But if they eke out, they have Texas Tech at home, and Texas Tech has really struggled on the road, especially on offense. I think they're the 107th ranked offense when on the road. If that happens, look out. Anything's possible. And then they win the Big 12 championship just barely, and it's just like, and Alabama goes and beats Georgia. The committee is going to have a real discussion about who to put in. That is, I do not envy their position if that scenario happens. Now, I'm not sure Alabama is going to beat Georgia. I'm not convinced of that right now. So I think this is like maybe a cool talking point, but I think that'll take care of itself is really the way that I'm seeing it right now. I don't see any evidence that Alabama's a better football team than Georgia. Now, Nick Saban, hard to bet against him, right? The 4 teams I think are going to be in: Georgia, Ohio State, Florida State, and Oregon. Florida State has an asterisk. I think I get a 1-week trial to see how they do against Florida, so that could change next week. The one thing that concerns me about that Florida State-Florida game is that Florida's offense has been really good on the road, but that's with Jordan Travis. And so we don't know without him how good that offense is going to be on the road because the defense hasn't been as good on the road. So we'll get into that a little bit more in the next show, which will be the predictions for the upcoming week. You can expect 3 episodes a week from us right now until the end of college football season, especially over the next couple weeks here as we get into the playoffs. And then when the playoff committee announces, we'll have a couple slow weeks, but we'll still be putting content out for you guys. Please go ahead and hit the subscribe button. You can find us here on YouTube. You can find us on Apple, Spotify. You can follow us on our social media as well. It all helps. Really appreciate it. And until next time, I'm Josh Rodriguez for Sports Idol Nation. Sports is in our DNA. I hope it's in yours too.